Hello and welcome to the November installment of the 2022-2023 International Leadership Series. My name is Dr. Nicholas Hudson, and I serve as the Director of Office of Student Engagement. And this is as I said, the third installment of the year for International Leadership Series. This is one of our premier leadership programs that we have here at TAMIU. And this year, our focus is on power and governance. And as we move through here, we in the International Leadership Series focus on the elements of global citizenship. Hopefully, those that attend these programs throughout your years here at TAMIU develop some of the skill sets that are here. And so we focus on sustainable development, social justice and equity, human rights, peace and conflict, identity and diversity, power and governance, and globalization and interdependence. And this year, we're focusing specifically on power and governance. For those of you that attend 5 out of the 6 International Leadership Series and complete the prompts on Blackboard, as well as participate in the Art for Social Change event in spring 2023, you actually become an International Leadership Fellow. And an International Leadership Fellow is one of our prestigious awards that are given here at the institution. You receive a medal or certificate, things of that nature that you get to participate in. And so a couple of things, we want to make sure that we talk about some baseline topics overall. Social justice and the lens that we're looking through this semester and this year is the inclusion of everyone in the full benefits of society, right? And the empowerment of people to participate fully in the cultural, economic, political, and social life of a country. And we're specifically today focusing on the political life of a country. So what is power? Power is the ability or official authority to decide what is best for others. And when we think about governance, it's those that have the positions of authority in the halls of government. So what is governance? Governance is the process of interactions through the laws, norms, powers, or language of an official society over a social system. That's a long way of saying, right, these folks are the folks that determine, or governance determine, the way in which we interact as a society. What are the laws? What are the norms that we have holistically? And so within that governance structure, there are certain levels of privileges that we do end up having. And privilege are the unearned access to resources that are only available to some people a result of their advantaged social member group. And because of the level of privilege that some have, that leads to others in the societal structure facing some form of oppression. And oppression, that we define it overall, is a system that maintains advantage and disadvantage based on social group membership. And as we're talking about this conversation about the 2022 election today, where there are going to be some themes that run through that as well. So today, we have a conversation on election 2022 and what is next for the American democratic experiment, right? The election was about a week ago. And it produced some surprising results overall. And we are excited to have Dr. Jack Byam today with us. Dr. John Kilburn unfortunately had a death in the family and was unable to be with us this week here. But we're going to have, today's a conversation. It's not a presentation, it's a conversation, questions between Dr. Byam and myself. Dr. Byam has earned his PhD in political science from Michigan State University, go Spartans. And his dissertation explored the relationship between liberal education, and politics in the writings of John Locke. And so if we think about political science, John Locke really has a foundational component of the democratic experiment in the American system. Since 2015, he's taught here at TAMIU in the Department of Social Sciences and teaches courses in American politics, 20th century political ideologies, ancient and modern political philosophy, and also in the Master of Arts in History and Political Thought. He has a book chapter, Authenticity or Reasonableness, a Lockean View of Leadership, which he examines ideas of authenticity and sincerity as moral ideals for leaders and ordinary citizens. And so, again, today's a conversation. We have some questions, but we're also going to take some questions from you all here. We're going to move on to that. And so Stop share. See how this works. There we go. So we got this here. And it's a little awkward for those online, but that's why we're kind of facing this way. So it's a conversation that we're going to have, especially because this is one of the political, I guess, midterm election results that kind of like defies the norm. And so let's start it off here, Ryan. Let's talk a little bit about the assessment of the state of American Democratic experiment pre-election and then post-election. What were some of your initial thoughts?
Sounds good. Before we jump into it, will the mic be able to hear voices here?
Correct, yeah.
It will be able to.
Yep.
Okay.
You just got to be able to speak a little bit louder.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. Well, globally, what we're seeing in the past few decades and presently is this concern that democratic norms are dwindling, sort of receding. And it may seem, I mean, for many persons, the phenomenon of Donald Trump is evidence that America was not immune to that same kind of trend. Of course, people have different views. So what I can say is that having studied the American founding, American history, having a PhD in political science, I think that there are a couple of signs that do worry me about the first is the politicization of the idea that when presidents take office, the first thing that the other party does is try to figure out ways to impeach. I think that's not a healthy thing, because if you look at the founding, emergency situation. Now it's become just another political process to disrupt. So I don't think that's very helpful. Another sign that I see that does kind of worry me is the polarization that's very evident. It seems like black, and here I'll use a term you may know, the idea of a public philosophy. It seems that in America, our public philosophy is hard to identify. What I mean by public philosophy? I mean a system of, a set of ideas that supports the entire system, rather than just the ideas of this part. And it seems like we have on everything, including facts. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, there's a kind of unanimity there in terms of the signage of that document. And we have this very key sentence: we hold these truths. And it's a wonderfully phrased sentence, because when I talked about this in the class before, it's not asserting that what follows are self-evident truths. What it's asserting is the commitment to see it that way, and or to hold these things as true. And sometimes I ask my classes, what would we put after that phrase today? We hold these truths. What is it that we all agree on as fundamental truth that supports the whole system? And sometimes we'll say that. So there are some worrying signs.
Yeah, I think, when I think about that idea of like, can we find things that we would agree on, and could we add additional, it's such an interesting thought process. I don't even know if we, today, due to the polarization of pretty much everything, whether it's science, whether it's culture, I don't know if we could, or current leaders could actually agree on certain truths that we all really believe in. I find that to be interesting. And I look at this concept of like the democratic experiment. We have been held as a beacon upon a hill of what democracy should look like. We begin to see some of the, like you said, some of the cracks come through. You mentioned really the impeachment immediately by an opposition party, right? That happened in 1997 and 98 with Bill Clinton, his impeachment, and saw it. Words of it start, continue with George W. Bush. You saw some of it continue with some words, even though they didn't continue with it with Obama. And then you saw when Democrats won the House in 2019, there was something there. Now, immediately as soon as the Republicans win the House here, there's already one day in. That's immediately what we're going to do is we're going to start impeachment proceedings against some governmental officials or even Biden himself. I find that's interesting. But I think when we talk about all of the state of American democratic experiment, I wonder, when we think back in our pivotal moments of history, in recent history in particular, at what point does January 6th and the insurrection that took place on January 6th really take hold in how this democratic experiment is going to transpire over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? So do you think that the insurrection has played an impact on the American experiment? Has it changed the American democratic experiment? Or if so, how?
Yeah, I would say, I don't think it has fundamentally changed American democracy. I don't think so. What I do think it's changed is our discourse. The way we talk about and conceive of ourselves, that has radically changed as a result of music. It seems like the ordinary voters who occupy no privileged place of power are much more aware of diverse and extreme elements within the population that they may not belong to, but are nevertheless aware of. And so, that changes the way we conceive of left and right and center and what it means to belong to those parts of the spectrum. Of course, the interpretation of that event, of course, is now a totally partisan event, right? I mean, we can't even agree on what it was. I mean, if you listen to the right, it's a nothing burger. If you listen to the left, it's insurrection is the word, right? I mean, insurrection is the word. So it's changed the way we talk about politics. The reason I don't think it's changed American politics is because it's not the first insurrection,
right?
And I don't think it'll be the last. I'm from Western Pennsylvania originally, and that's of course the home of more than one kind of rebellion, whiskey rebellion.
Yeah, I was thinking of that same thing. Yeah.
And that was over taxes.
Yeah.
That was over taxes. So I think it wasn't the first, it won't be the last. But I think it has resulted in increased awareness of extreme elements. And how can you miss that image of, like, for example, the QAnon shaman? We can't fail to say, what is going on?
Yeah, I think about it like it's an international leadership series, and I think about this from an international perspective. Like, I have family that lives in Argentina, and they saw that, and I talked to them thereafter, and they're like, I talked to them when I went to study abroad this in May, and they're like, what in the world is going on here, right? Like, what in the world is going on with America? They modeled their democracy after us in many ways, and many other socialist countries. And they're not immune from military juntas taking over, and et cetera. But and so I wonder, when I think about, and I come from a own privilege that I do have. I come from a very liberal perspective, right? So on the spectrum of technology, I'm more leftist, but I also am a fan of history, right? I think for those who are fans of history, I've never once would have thought in my lifetime when I've seen individuals, try to enter into United States House of Representatives and Secret Service having to shoot people. That's something that you just don't fathom. I lived in Washington, D.C. for 8 years. I just don't fully get that and why there isn't this sense of urgency from others. I mean, there are some on the right. Cheney comes to mind. Those that are kind of safeguarding democracy holistically. And she played a a role even after she lost her primary in Wyoming. I wonder, when you talk about that, what role did that play in kind of, it's grilled into a lot of psyche when you talk about that. More folks are now aware of what's happening on a national level. So when we talk about the midterm election, what role did January 6th play into perhaps the outcome of the election?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's certainly, without a doubt, what you see in an election is the aggregate result of millions of voters. The decisions are sort of added up. And so unless we take a hard look at the survey data, we're really just kind of guessing or speculating. So the best we can do is ask the voters themselves, hey, why did you vote that? Right? Or what was important to you when you voted this way or when you decided to see so and so. And it's very interesting because, again, it breaks down into partisan. These issues, I mean, well, it won't come as a surprise that the events of January 6th and dangers of democracy, to democracy that seemed to present mattered more to people who voted for Democratic candidates than Republican. Certain kinds of issues played a great role. January 6th, COVID, inflation in the economy, and the very idea of safeguarding democracy. So when you look at the survey, it's very interesting to see the Republicans take certain issues more seriously, and vice versa. The Democrats. Now, the key to winning races today is to get as many independents on your side as possible, because it's fairly easy to fire up the base. Okay, that's something that the Lord is extremely good at, firing up the base, and he's proven in his 3 losses to be less adept at winning over some of the unaffiliated, and so you've got to somehow try to win over the unaffiliated. And January 6th, so the effect was for the unaffiliated and for the independent. When Trump, for example, announced an endorsement of a candidate, my guess is the unaffiliated went right over to the other candidate. They just lined up on the other side. That was, I think it alienated independents at the same time it fired up the base. I don't mean to get ahead of ourselves, but it definitely played a role.
Yeah, and I agree with you, because I think, you're not going to have it, so it's kind of a little script, but yeah. I think that's such an interesting point. Independents, I think in the most recent survey of those, how did you vote? I think the Democrats won independents by 5 points in the midterm election. It wasn't a large increase. Normally in midterm elections, the party that's in power loses a whole bunch of seats in the House, loses some in the Senate. The last time a president gained a seat in the Senate was in 2002, and that was a rally around the flag kind of ideal after September 11th, right? Historically, the party that's in power loses anywhere, I think the average of 40 seats in the House. And this time, I think they may have used a net of 8 seats, which is remarkable. When I look at this, it was the independent voters that kind of swung hard against, in these swing states, against Trump-endorsed candidates. And I wonder, this concept of the big lie that's been thrown around, how did that play a role in there, right? Like this election denying, you look, I think Carrie Lake, the governor, hopeful from Arizona, has yet to concede. She's lost the race to Katie Hobbs, the Democratic nominee, who's now governor-elect of Arizona. Yet she has yet to concede. I saw an article today that Carrie Lake's trying to become Trump's running mate through her denial, and working,
I hadn't read that.
Yeah, working with Trump down in Mar-a-Lago on lawsuits, and really kind of like rejecting the turnout or the elections. And so I wonder, how does this concept of big lie play a factor into what we're seeing in this Democratic survey? Most of the time, we've accepted the results overall, right? Like, and there's been times in our history we have not. The election was around that time. Yeah, 1880, where we saw there had to be a compromise, and it was the end of Reconstruction down in the South. But lots on that.
Thoughts on the big lie? Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here, and one almost has to go back a little ways and talk about events leading up to the Trump nomination. And, so it's to start at a very general level. In a democracy, a big democracy like ours, the relationship between the people in general and the rulers or the governors, the people who make the law, there's always an element of trust. And there's got to be, because the people don't have firsthand information or access to what's going on. So it's not that the people are dumb, it's just they're at quite a distance, and so trust is always an element. And what we've seen in the last several years is this decrease in trust, both in politicians and in the media. So the psychological state of many Republican voters is stubbornness, because they're not ready to believe the same media that led them down other rabbit holes. All right. So the big lie, believers of the big lie are fairly common, and it's ordinary. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist for it. It's a lot of ordinary folks who are not otherwise conspiracy theorists or crazy or not jobs or anything, who believe that the election was somehow taken. Now, the visuals on election night were sort of striking because it started out all red. If you watch the election, the visuals, look at America was like red. We thought, oh, Trump had these big rallies, and President Biden, he didn't have a lot of high energy events leading into the campaign. So how can this be? How could it be that the night starts out red, and then so I'm going to go to bed, right? I wake up in the next morning and it's blue. Yeah. It's like slowly, in the wee hours of the morning, the picture of America on the election map just slowly starts to move. That was a hard visual for people to sort of come to terms with. But for those who know how election results come in, it didn't remain an obstacle for long. You just kind of have to look at the be patient. Maybe they should report them in a different way, what have you. But I think that election denials continue to exist. I mean, we gotta point the finger somehow at several groups. First of all, President Trump laid the groundwork for this lie before the election ever happened. He prepared his followers to believe that if he lost, it was going to be stolen, and not as a result of any failure. And so, that is certainly something definitely that he did very, very effectively. And the lie was repeated for a long time by respectable people. And again, because it's a big democracy, we're not all wise, and we're not information. So we look to the trusted people who respect are saying it. Now, Trump laid the groundwork for that lie in part as a response, part psychologically. He doesn't like to lose. He wants to be loved. He doesn't want to be rejected. Yeah. These are things are sort of unique and idiosyncratic to him. But also, in part, it was a reaction to elite maneuvering on the Democrat side. Prior to his election, it was very clear that hardcore conservatives and most Democrats did not want Trump. And they actively campaigned against him. And shortly after he was elected, and for a long time into his term as president, he was dogged by the collusion accusation between himself and Russia. And the whole point of that was, one might say, to make him, in his own way, stole the election with the help of the Russians. And so when that turned out as a result of the investigation to be started by documents created by spies and paid for by elite Democrats, lead the FBI down a rabbit hole. I mean, for an election denier who's not otherwise a conspiracy theorist, I mean, if a party can achieve that, why couldn't they swing an election? Why is it so outlandish to think that with the proprietary technology of voting machines that there couldn't be some elite manipulation behind the scenes? So it's a lie. I mean, personally, I think Trump just lost. That's my personal belief. I think he lost. And I think he was careless with his comments, and I think he was. But the lie will die hard, partly for the reasons that I said, that I've explained, and but also now because now it's a sign of showing support. And so there's a kind of indifference to the truth. I'm just going to show my support by believing it, right? You can tell me it's false all day long, but I'm a real Republican because I'm going to tell you what I believe. So there's a lot going on there.
It's multifaceted. Talk about like the history, right? A little bit of the history. I mean, so you talked about the elite Democrats in 2016, 17, and produced some documentation that led the FBI down where it was. But if you go back to even 16 years earlier in the 2000 election, right? There's a lot of election denial that took place on the Democrat side as it relates to President Bush's election in malfeasance, many levels in the Florida election, where Bush, through the Supreme Court decision, won by 530
So close
votes, right? Like, and so you can see that kind of election denial begin already many years before. So I think that this concept of norms that we've had here, we've seen some of that erosion take place, right?
Yeah.
We have, and it's not just on one side or the other. I think that that's, sometimes we say, Trump is the one that's caused all this. It's been quite a bit, right? Quite a bit across the board. And so I can even, as a partisan, say like, hey, it's not just on one side, it's on both sides. When I look at this as well, there was a large decision in June, the Dobbs decision, that motivated what we now see as the number two reason an exit poll for people to turn out, especially with youth voters. It was actually one of the top reasons. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning Engagement surveyed 18 to 30-year-olds. This is at Tufts University. They surveyed 18 to 30-year-olds. By the way, 18 to 29-year-olds turned out at 27% nationwide. That is the second largest that we had. First largest was in 2019 or 2018, the last election. But they turned out at high rates, kind of unparalleled before. But it's the number one reason a lot of them turned out was due to the Dobbs decision. When we look specifically at the Latino population in specific states that really their vote mattered, 77% of 18 to 29-year-old Latino voters rated gun control actually as one of their top reasons for voting, and 89% of Latinos said that abortion, access to reproductive rights, was their top motivating issue. So when we look at the youth vote and the Latino youth vote in particular, that was the number one reason they had articulated their support of Democrats. Latinas across the country from the 18 to 29-year-old range voted for Democrats 79% to 21%, versus Latinos, which were a little bit more balanced, I guess you could say, but still 64% of 18 to 29 Latinos voted for Democrats versus 36% voted for Republicans or other parties. That's a large disparity. So I wonder, just off of your own thoughts, like what role did the Dobbs decision play, right? Like the Republicans have been for years saying they wanted to do something about abortion and overturn Roe v. Wade, and when they did, it was kind of not it's kind of like a perpetual dog running after the mailman. They caught the mailman, now what? Right? So I wonder kind of what do we see here with that? Is that going to continue to play a role here?
It could continue to play a role for certain. Certainly, it did play a role in this election. Many of the saw that might work to their disadvantage.
Right.
Disadvantage of Republicans, and he turned out to be correct. Now, I can say that I have anecdotal conversations with students in my class. I say, you know, if you know somebody who doesn't vote, or maybe you self-decide not to, say, why did they don't vote? So I have interesting conversations with students about that. And what I've heard anecdotally merges very nicely with the research. The research suggests that young persons are not quick to align themselves with the two major parties. And so younger persons make up a lot of the growing independent category, the unaffiliated category. And what galvanizes them, what gets their blood moving, is issues, specific issues. And I think the abortion issue in this election really illustrates that young persons are motivated by specific issues. And the framing of the abortion issue is very important. Very important. I mean, the Democrats have a very effective way of framing this as the patriarchy of trying to kill children. I mean, abortion is, the discussion is longer than that, but in terms of a frame, that's a very effective. And so I think the abortion issue will continue to play a role, maybe not as big as a role as it played in this most recent election, certainly without a doubt.
Yeah, and I wonder, you know, you talk about this issue with the younger voters. So Latino voters and youth voters, the 18 to 29-year-olds for Latinos, they make up a majority of all Latinos in the following states: Virginia, Arizona, Colorado, North Carolina, and Nevada. Think about the states that just had very close elections, right? So you think about Arizona, very close elections. So it's these youth voters that are younger Latino voters that are voting overwhelmingly that basically saved Katie Hobbs, that saved Mark Kelly, and even more so in Nevada, we have Senator who just won by like 5,000 votes. But the Latino vote and the youth vote, what I call the youth vote, I'm not in that frame, but 18 to 29 is a pretty large, overwhelming in Nevada as well. I wonder if you've seen that, but I won't from the independents, but I also see a different, right? So there was the bodily autonomy conversations. I also see a coalition somewhat building it. And I wonder if that is where we can get some headway on this kind of issue. Because you see voters in Kentucky, conservative state, that just, I think, reelected, if I'm not saying Chicago, was reelected. You see Montana, you see Kansas, three pretty solidly red states. First Kansas in June, I believe, or July, around that time when they voted. But you saw Kentucky and Montana both codify in their state constitutions the right to an abortion. It was already in both of their state constitutions, but in Kentucky and in Montana, but the frame was to remove it. In Kansas, it was to add it into the state constitution. Same thing in Michigan, California, and Vermont. You had really the codification of a woman's right to choose inside of their state constitution. But I wonder to see, you have these conservative electorates, and I've been hearing a lot about rights. Don't take away my rights. And I wonder if you're going to be able to see maybe down the road, crystal ball, this kind of coalition building up. Yeah, I'm pro, don't touch my body, but like, you know, I want to make the decision for myself. But then others on the libertarian street say, no, I don't want the government to come in and take away my rights. What are some initial thoughts for that?
Yeah, so you raise a very interesting issue. Let me come at it this way. There's two easily identifiable kinds of conservatives on these hot button issues: gay marriage, abortion, and traditional, very sensitive. There's the conservatives who are simply against those sorts of changes. And then there's the kind of conservative who is not in principle against those things, but doesn't want the Supreme Court to make the rules. And those conservatives have a hard time explaining themselves to ordinary, especially to young people. Because when you first start learning about American politics and you start learning about the Supreme Court, one of the most important things it's necessary to do is to distinguish between the legal question. And the justices on the Supreme Court have a constitutional mandate and responsibility to think about things from a legal. And so their most recent decision, for those of you who are not familiar with not, the Dobbs decision was simply the justices saying Roe was wrong, not because abortion is immoral, but because the Constitution doesn't have anything to say about abortion. And our job is to interpret the Constitution. And so it's very a legal kind of reason, not a moral. They're not our moral teachers. And so the solution, I think, would be, crystal ball would be for a kind of coalition to form to add an amendment to the Constitution, just as we see going on at the state level. Now, in terms of gay marriage, I think that might have happened. It's almost like, you know, Justice Kennedy was, I don't know what motivated him, but certainly he sort of stole the thunder almost from the general population, which had made such a transformation over the past decades. I mean, the right, especially the religious right, had fought long and hard against the transition to accepting gay marriage, and frankly, they simplified. And it would seem like a majority of persons were like, okay, gay marriage, we're down with that. Let's stop fighting about that. And so this certain kind of conservative would not want the Supreme Court to judicially create that rule. They would prefer to see the people generate from within themselves a much more binding kind of national. It's harder, it's longer, but it's ultimately more fun.
Yeah, and correct. Yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, the U.S. Senate began, well, they didn't beginning the debate, 62, so all 52 Democrats and 12 Republicans voted to begin debate on the national bill to recognize same-sex marriage, which allows states to still deny same-sex marriage. So Texas, if the Supreme Court were to overturn Obergefell decision, Texas could still say, we're not going to issue same-sex marriages, but this new federal law would say, no matter what, your gay marriage is still legitimate. You know, so I think that there may be some. I mean, we have so many questions here, and we're over prepared for this, but I'm excited. You know, we see, I want to shift a little bit to state level.
Sure.
Because I think when we talk about the American democratic experiment, I think a lot of politics that we're familiar with here in Texas, we have a lot of students being very motivated, youth voters, very motivated with Democratic nominee Mitt O'Rourke. But again, he was once viewed as a rising star in the Democratic Party. He came within 3 percentage points of beating Ted Cruz in 2018. Kind of in less than, I think, 4 years, he's lost 3 elections.
Big
elections, right? Like, he didn't win the Democratic nomination, didn't win the U.S. Senate. He even lost votes. I find this fascinating as a non-Texan, lost votes to Lupe, I forget, the last Democrat to run against Greg Abbott in 2018. I'm like, he lost ground. And so on a side note, I sit as the state Democratic Executive Committee person representing Senate District 21. So this is Senate District 21. I represent Senate District 21 and the state Democratic Executive Committee, overseeing the Texas Democratic Party. We have our quarterly meeting here on December 10th, and I have tons of questions like, what in the world did we do? Because we lost up and down with probably the most effective slates of candidates that we've had in years. I look at Michelle Garza, I look at Rochelle Garza, I look at other folks in the state, Warford, Jay Clyburn, right? These are some pretty big folk that are coming in. They lost ground. So I'm just curious. One, starting off, what are your thoughts about Beto O'Rourke and his role in Texas politics moving forward?
Yeah. So he, unfortunately, he's had these 3 losses, and psychologically, I think for voters, the pressure is on him now to kind of explain, you know, why those 3 losses. It's hard to run a 4th time after those 3 losses, but if I were Beto's campaign manager, I think I would offer words of encouragement. It's not like it was a slam dunk, you know. I mean, I think he's a very viable candidate, actually. He's very good at firing up the base, expert at that. I think the traditional wisdom is that as the campaign goes on and transitions to a wider and wider number of voters, that you begin to appeal towards those moderates. Some of his past statements do dog him, and the Republicans are going to see that they are, you know, like, hell yeah, we're coming for your day on 15. You know, I mean, this is Texas. You know, maybe don't put it like that.
I don't maybe think if I could run in Texas again, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Maybe when he was saying it, I don't think he thought it was the Democratic nomination.
Yeah, he said that while he was running for president. So I don't think he should disappear. I think he has a future. Whether or not he has the will to have a future, I'm not sure. I don't know, but I think he has a future.
Yeah, I mean, I do as well, and friends of folks on his campaign, and I think, you know, he has an uncanny ability to raise money.
Yeah.
So, you know, probably maybe PNC role or something of that nature.
He raised more than Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Initially.
Yes.
Yeah. Which was incredible.
Yeah, he did. It's when I look at this, I just wonder, did he find himself in the foot a little bit? You know, he's a great candidate for people that are my persuasion, but is he going to look at the election results here in Texas? Zapata County for governor and went red again, the same way they went red in 2020 for Trump, but then they voted at high numbers for Cuellar and Senator Zapatini, right? So you see, they're not averse to democratic ideals and principles, but maybe just the candidate themselves, right? And some of the statements they have. Starr County, which is also in Senate District 21, down there in Rio Grande City and Roma, in Starr County, they also they still stay blue and voted for Beto, but at a lesser degree than they had in 2024 Biden. So I look at all these things, and I just wonder a little bit about this idea of like folks. It's kind of, I feel like a little bit like Charlie Brown and Lucy, at least on my end. I mean, if you don't know this analogy, this is probably a little too old for them, but like
YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube, Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football, right? The football conversation, right? So Lucy always holds the football, and when Charlie Brown tries to go kick the football, she always takes the football away. I think Democrats feel this way in the state of Texas. At least I do. I'm like, we get so close, we get so close. No, we're not anywhere near close. But you know, I often believe that Texas isn't a red state; it's a non-voting state. Mm-hmm. We have over 50% of, 60% of voters, or 45% of voters, 55% of voters that were registered to vote didn't vote this time around, right? Like, didn't feel as if anything was motivating factor to get them out to vote. You see that here in Laredo. 68% of Laredoans that are registered to vote said, nah. So I get in this, like, what causes folks to get motivated? And I think maybe from your political science professor hat, like, I don't know what else could have motivated folks in Texas this time around on multiple levels. Here in Laredo, you had our mayor, see that 10 people running for mayor, right? You had 4 city council seats, you have tons of these different seats, and yet we had such a low turnout. What do you think, so looking locally, what do you think will get folks motivated? What contributes to a low turnout here?
Hold on. No. The same reason I say so. That's a joke, really. But I'm puzzled, actually, like you. I'm puzzled. It seems like the candidates were there. There was more advertising. cycles. The issues were there to galvanize younger voters, and a lot of the campaign dollars were spent on that, which also is a way of reaching younger voters. So, you know, the lower voter turnout is kind of a mystery to me too. And I wish I had the answer. Maybe we should ask.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully all of you voted in the election. If you didn't, still vote again here locally. There's a runoff December 13th. So I do, hopefully that works. I think it's 16th, but it's Saturday the 16th. And early voting happening before that. I don't know. I get asked this question all the time. Why is the turnout so low? I get asked by politicians and consultants, and I'm like, especially here in Webb County, I'm like, I couldn't tell you because water is an issue here, electricity is an issue here, right? Like when you think back to the winter storm of 2021, when you think of the state of reproductive rights in the state of Texas, we are ground zero for the border wall that took place, and now Governor Abbott has installed some fencing here in Webb County, Zapata County, and the county that Eagle Pass is in. Not Dimmick, but Eagle Pass. So you see, when they're doing these things, I just wonder about this. I don't know what else could galvanize folks. I often heard about this too, and from other people when I go around and knock on doors as well, is they argue that it's the same people on the ballot, and they don't believe that any change is going to happen. Or they believe that many of them are corrupt. That's a lot of the concepts that I hear from them. That those politicians only look out for their own economic interests. This is pretty verbatim from I asked students, why don't you participate in the process if you're locally? How do we motivate folks to counter that narrative that exists in there?
That's going to be very challenging, I think. And I think the real cure will simply be time. I think that I'm not originally from the region. I moved here in 2015. I find it a fascinating place. Other people have told me about what politics was like before, and the strength of the patron system, and very, very fascinating history. And some books that people are ready to write, but not ready to write because the right people haven't died yet. So it looks like, it looks like the story in the we told. But when we grow up and we kind of listen to our relatives and people that we respect. And so the generation that witnessed that kind of politics is still very much and still very much sharing stories. And may, I speculate, be spreading some cynicism, about local politics. Now, I will say that for whatever it's worth, a little bit of logic, I think, will help to counter at least somewhat the basic narrative. I think it's extremely unlikely that all of the citizens, 100% of the people who are not in office, have the community's best interest at heart, while 100% of the elected local officials do not have the city's best interest. That's not true, right? Yeah. That's totally unreasonable. I think it's reasonable to suspect that many people who sit in local office do have the but they're fighting against history.
And I think, this is evident in this current election right now. There was a lot of, so I also sit on the election ballot board. So I'm the one that verifies signatures in Webb County. And we can see a lot of these people that are like, oh, that's interesting. There are a whole bunch of ballots coming from the same community coming in. And so we know locally those are called camioneros, right? So those are the ballot harvesters, things of that nature. It's the cynicism that does come in. I very much believe that. And I wonder, you all as students, TAMIU has a high voter registration rate, 80% voter registration rate in the 2020 election. And we also have a high turnout rate when we think it matters. In the 2020 election, we turned out of those that were registered in the 70 percentile. So 7 out of 10 TAMIU students voted if they were registered. In the 2018, we had 54% of TAMIU students turn out to vote, which is actually very high for the community. When we're part of this national coalition that tries to get students to become more motivated, which is why we're talking about politics in the International Leadership Series conversation, on purpose, right? To raise awareness around these issues. I just wonder, when you talk about like having to wait a little bit, we're seeing more of the TAMIU students become educated, they're staying here in the community, becoming engaged at higher levels. We may see that shift in the next decade.
That's what I would.
Yeah, so I agree with you. One last conversation that I want to get to, because there's a lot of conversation around the Republican Party making headway with Hispanic community. And I think that's a misnomer in my view. Because I think we often think of Latino voters as being a monolith, just like Black voters. Pretty much on a national level, Black voters vote Democrat at 90% rates, around that 86, 90% rates. But Latino voters have never been overwhelmingly Democratic. They run the spectrum. You know, Latinos as an ethnicity do not have the same shared experience. When I look down in Florida, for example, you have Cubans in Miami. In Virginia, you have Central Americans, right? Really coming from the triangle in Central America, Nicaragua, Honduras, and El Salvador. New York, you have Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. Here in Texas, we have a lot of Mexican Americans, etc. A lot of headway has been made about the Republicans winning in the special election in Congressional District 34, I believe it was, in the summer. Mayra Flores winning a seat that she just lost in the 2022 midterms. But a lot of headway was made, fanfare was made by the Republican Party here on Texas 15, with Michelle Vallejo losing that seat, which is right next to us, right? It's really, literally in Lago County, you know. So I wonder, is there any validity? Is there any, like, what are some thoughts at least around are Republicans making headway? Your political science hat, et cetera, are they making headway with Hispanic or Latino voters on the national level and the big state level?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I will say that I mean, to go back to Trump, I mean, Trump did rather surprisingly well. So, and it just really proves what you just said, that Hispanic voters are not a monolith. Knowing that about a person, that's the ethnicity that they claim, not predict for you. Definitely. So, you know, I think they are. I think nationally, at least, that is a sign that they are making some headway. Nationally, locally, I'm honestly a little bit. I'm not sure. I'm not certain.
Yeah, I think the jury's still out a little bit, but I do think that, you know, when you hear this, like Republican or like Hispanic voters are voting Republican. I'm like, well, are they? One, I don't know if there's anything out there. Are they? Number one. But number two, I mean, I look at Texas 15. That was gerrymandered specifically by the Texas Republicans to win that seat, no matter who was running. It's a closer than expected election. When I look at that, right? Like they had gotten 2 additional seats in the 2020 census. So they created one here in the South Texas area to specifically go up to the outskirts of the very conservative areas around San Marcos and outside of San Antonio. Very gerrymandered. When I look at this, that used to be more compact down in the valley. So I wonder if this was just like a mirage.
I think in that case, you hit the nail on the head. I think you're right. I think that gerrymandering is such a problem because the idea of a democracy, at the very least, is that you somehow choose your leaders. Gerrymandering means the leaders are choosing the voters, not the voters choosing their leaders. So, you know, in the case of that district, I think that the right explanation is gerrymandering. And so it kind of takes back from the narrative.
you know, and it's the same thing in Florida, right? So there's 4 seats that I mean, Governor DeSantis is very much like aggressive in his push for new gerrymandered map to gain, and Republicans gained 4 seats in this election from Florida, specifically in South Texas. In the gerrymandered seats. I wonder, is that, right, when you look at some of the Latino voters nationwide, we look at, there's actually been a sharp swing back to the Democratic Party, in New Mexico 3rd, where just like 60% Latino right on the border in Mexico, huge congressional district that just went from a Republican in 2020 to now a Democrat in 2020. So look at that. It's a very interesting line, nonetheless. So we're going to open it up to some quick questions here from you all here in the audience for Dr. Bynum or myself or anything of that nature. We found this interesting conversation. At least it's something different that we usually do. Questions? Yes.
I wanted to bring this up. Would you have considered January 6th a military insurrection time?
No, I wouldn't have considered it military.
No, not operation, insurrection, because I know that it was at the time. They did take the government office, but I don't think that they would have used actual live weaponry against the actual people that were there.
So like the military coming in afterwards to dispel after, like, to push away the people, or
No, like if the people that rushed the building, I know that there were some of those people armed, some of the extremists or some people that wanted to protect the people from getting shot from live ammo, but would you have considered them using those weapons against them? If they had the weapons, would they have considered actually firing real bullets at them just because they were armed? Or would they have waited till they started firing at the actual government?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, it's sort of counterfactual. But based on their statements, it was more, it wasn't an assassination. It was more like a hostage kind of scenario where you extract something. So I don't think they intend.
for a majority of them. I do think that there were, and I think you see right now with the oath keepers who were, the government just rested their case yesterday or let's see, others. Potentially. Pence, the vice president, that's right. I don't know. I'm glad we don't have to find out.
Yeah.
Other questions? Oh, yeah.
I have a question because we spoke about Beto, but do you think like Abbott himself played a role on him regaining the governor position?
Anything that Abbott did that contributed to his own success?
Yeah.
Abbott has been a very effective governor in terms of consolidating his power while in office, gaining further support, raising funds, doing things that impress the right sorts of people, and all those things contribute to his being looked on as someone who sticks to his guns, as the expression goes, does big things. I think so. I think all those things contributed to his image. He's very important. Are those the sorts of things that answer the question, or were you asking if he did anything like underhanded?
No. Yeah, like I guess my question was more like, and I think you did answer like if he did something like to gain the public favor. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at least with the people who voted for him, they were impressed enough to go back. The idea of sending migrants to sanctuary cities, that's looked upon with great favor by his fans and great disapproval by people who don't like government. So they set ideas of how it should be done. So he does big things, and those big things appeal to a number of his voters.
He also does it in a way that I think is not as threatening to others.
I agree. I totally agree. I wish I would have said that.
Yeah, so I think that that's like, he's figured out, I think, a pretty good balance between carrying on some of the theatrics that Donald Trump did without using the vitriolic language or incendiary language that Trump did, right? Similarly, DeSantis also does those theatrics like Trump liked, right? So Governor DeSantis is Trump liked. It's how I view it. But you see that, right? And I think that's like when I take my like step out of the partisan role, I begin to see Abbott potentially. Folks are very focused right now on Donald Trump just announced his presidency in 2024. My God. How many like so soon? We've never seen this before. Ever seen it so soon after an election. Maybe presidency. I'm like, oh, we just finished. Can we? Not yet. Start that soon. But we see already some of the blame we placed on him for 2022 election. Like 3 months. We used to begin some of the fissures taking place within the Republican Party, like DeSantis. I would say keep an eye out for Abbott in the 2024 election. I think he has a unique and has played a unique role in the current state of the Republican Party. I would say that's a pretty good shot. Maybe not as good of a shot right now as DeSantis, but this is way too good.
It is.
What will happen?
But to your point about DeSantis, he too, like Abbott, is making sure that he accomplishes this sort of thing, while being more calculated in his speech. It's almost as if they're learning from Trump's club.
Correct. Yeah.
And so we see DeSantis supporting election deniers, but he refuses to say that he too.
Unlike a lot of the nominees that Trump supported.
Right.
Right, like they're big. Well, friends, it's kind of, unless there's any last question, yes.
Sorry. So, I think exploring that, we were asking about, kind of had some thoughts about that, right? And I feel like personally, one of the things that really like disillusioned me as a voter, that you see a lot of back and forth, right? So like we go on certain issues. Here comes another political party power and undo that, right? So it's a lot of back and forth. So I feel like a lot of times we're not moving forward, we're just staying stagnant or like in these issues. And I feel like James Madison, right, like warned us against these actions, and it's like we're in way too also in the way that the influence that these political parties and political divide that there is really what the candidate has to say and what the candidate has to I guess bring forward.
All right, you answer that one.
Okay,
yeah. I'll
yeah.
come back in. Yeah, I'll come back in.
Whoever has the answer to that question can be very rich.
Yeah.
That's challenging. It's sort of everybody who's concerned is working on that very thing. And people are writing books about polls. I am not for that. I know that in the future, things will look different. How we get there.
Because I feel like as time progresses, getting more divided.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I don't know if we're getting more divided. I think the media in and of itself is kind of echoing a lot of that division. But when I think back from a historical perspective, we are no more divided than we were in 1860, 1888, 1880.
Even at the time.
Yeah, right. So I don't think that's there. Political parties will, I don't think they're going to. What I do think will happen is a larger slice of the electorate, including a lot of youth voters, as they progress through their age, they're going to stop identifying as Democratic or Republican. And then that's going to cause them, candidates and parties, to really rethink what they're doing. But I don't think you're going to see an end of and I don't quote me on it, but I don't think you're gonna see an end of Democratic or Republican parties anytime soon. What you will see is a larger slice of the electorate moving more towards independent, and it's really the youth. Like, I think he's spot on. Students today do not identify as Republican or Democrat; they identify as independent. Overwhelmingly, yet they still support the Democratic nominees at higher rates than even historically. Years more leftward in supporting the candidate, but they don't want to participate in political parties. It's very hard to get people to even participate from my end, and I'm very active in the political party. There's a few youth here in North County that's active in the political party. So I do think that you're going to see that. And because of that, I think political parties may, I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, they're going to soften some of the tones. But it's a zero-sum game, I think. And so in many ways, people want to be in power. And so they're going to do whatever they can to suppress the vote. Voter suppression techniques are not just limits on voter registration and voter polling locations. It's also voter suppression when you hear over and over and over negative attack ads. And I think that's what turns off a lot of youth voters, is negative attack ads. I couldn't turn on Hulu and not see campaign ads against on one side and the other side, right? And whether it was Justice, the primary Justice Santos and Henry Cuellar, or in the general with Henry Cuellar and Castro Garcia. As a youth person, I'm like, I turned on Google for a reason. I thought I wasn't going to get political campaign, but they find a way to permeate my my TV still, but they get so bad that it's like I have what I often think some pox on both their houses. I want nothing to do with this, and that is voter suppression in and of itself. So
That's it.
Yeah.
Psychological.
Yeah.
That's what it amounts to.
Correct. It's like,
Yeah.
why would I want to do this?
You want to disengage.
Yeah.
Let me just ask one follow-up question, just something to think about. Do you think, based on your question, do you think your initial expectations is that's one way of approaching your question? Instead of what can make it live up to my ideal, maybe there's something. I'm not saying this, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have the idea of democracy, or a lot of us have the idea of democracy that forward and see it going back and forth. And I'm gonna speak directly on the issue of like women's rights, for example. And like for so many years, the hands were off the women's body, and now the hands are on there, and it's kind of like you get me like it's disappointing, right? For a lot of women.
A lot of those women didn't actually show up, right? So I'm gonna be honest, like they didn't show up, right? And I mean that like I kind of play that little bit of devil's advocate, right? Like, right? So like they're fine with it, right? So question right here, yeah.
Okay, so building trust back up in governments and candidates. Yeah, so that's extremely challenging. You know, I think just to speak on one hand, the media has an interesting career throughout American history. The first newspapers, for example, were explicitly partisan instruments. There was no feeling like they ought to be there. Arms of the party, getting out, you know, the message of the gospel, what have you. There was a time in American politics where they felt the pressure to be fair and balanced. But that time has also passed. I mean, we have to tell a longer story about it. But today, many journalists consider their duty to be policy. Right? And so that's very challenging. That means we can't look, we always have to keep an eye to the politics of someone's politics when we Now, one of the benefits of living in a world like that is that it forces you to become a good thinker, right? Rather than take this attitude of, well, the world should tell me the truth. I'm not very good. The world should tell me the truth. Actually, if you want the truth, you're gonna have to work for it. And so one of the upsides of it is that it compels you to become a better citizen. Still though, to your point, I too would like to do some, and I don't know the way they are,
Yeah. It's interesting. You talk about causing us to become more critical thinkers.
It should.
It should. I think that the emphasis is should. I don't know if it does, right? Because if we live in an echo chamber, me only going to a specific media outlet that I align with, I'm not going to find the truth necessarily, right? And on the opposite end as well, if you're conservative and you only go to conservative media outlets, you're going to be fed one answer. And so I also wonder, just from a pessimistic standpoint, like, does this lead us down to the dummy of America? Because we're in this echo chamber where we're not wanting to, maybe we're too stubborn as Americans to want to find the truth. I don't know.
No, I totally agree. I mean, if you really want to find the truth, you have to get out of the
I think it makes, most of us are like, nah,
Yeah.
I'm fine, right? I mean, that's what Facebook is all built on algorithms, right? So you're not even, you have to go out of your way to find things that disagree with you. Instagram, same thing. Twitter, that's another hot mess. But now with Elon Musk, but anyway, all right, friends, that ends our time today. Thank you so very much for coming today in this conversation as we support this. If you haven't signed in, please sign in here, and we'll see you all next spring.